we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's roundtable, understanding the adoption gap in supply chain management. Over the past few years, supply chains have moved from being a back end operational topic to a boardroom priority. The COVID 19 pandemic exposed just how fragile global supply chain networks really are. And according to several reports on the WEF platform, COVID 19 actually accelerated the push for greater resilience, better transparency, traceability, and accountability, and increased trust across the entire industry. In the European Union, for example, initiatives such as the Digital Product Passport and the Ecodesign for Sustainable Product Regulations are no longer optional conversations. Transparency and traceability are becoming legal obligations. Companies soon must prove product origin, ethical sourcing, and regulatory compliance. And they must do so using systems that are reliable and measurable. At the same time, the supply chain software market alone, according to reports from the future market sites, is projected to grow from $32 billion in 2025 to nearly 100 billion by 2035, while the broader industry, including logistics and transportation, remains a multi trillion ecosystem, currently still losing billions annually due to, according to reports, due to inefficiencies. So here's the key question. In, if blockchain and Web3, including the increasing regulatory clarity and frameworks, promises greater transparency, tamper resistant systems, automated payments, real time tracking, increased trust in the global supply chain, why then have we still not seen the level of adoption as we would have expected? That's exactly what we're here today to unpack. Of course, just some final words. This roundtable is not about prescribing a single path forward. No, it's about giving both the blockchain communities and the wider industry access to informed, experience based perspectives from experts within the industry. So, with me today are several industry experts, thought leaders. I'll invite each of you to briefly introduce yourselves, who you are, the organization that you represent, and maybe a fun fact about yourself. So, I'd say let's start with Andre.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So for me, here's a good morning. I'm located in Brazil. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening for everyone watching. I'm currently CPO and co-founder at Vetri. So we are a company based in Brazil, and we are working with the automotive industry to create a digital vehicle passport. We are going through our OEMs and also through our ecosystem as well from the automotive industry here in Brazil, talking with not just OEMs but also with the regulatory agencies and also with the government and the people that produce parts. So the full ecosystem, which is huge. So we are working with them to actually put together and implement this digital vehicle passport, which is a digital product passport itself in technology, talking about it. And our journey has been like very challenging since last year. So we started in January, February last year. And from last year to now, where we are today, we are evolving very fast, considering all the ecosystem. Currently, we are implementing a pilot with one of the transit authorities here in Brazil for 1,000 vehicles, which will be tokenized, and you have their own digital product passport for each vehicle. And we are bringing together OEMs, also banks, and also security companies to be together with this. And then with the Transit Authority, we are working together with the government to have also the parts traceability, which is part of a bigger program in Brazil called Programa Mover, which is a mobility program, a green mobility program. So it's all connected. Very challenging, very excited to be here. So a fun fact about me, I am a father of twins, 6 years old, and we surf together. Yes, we surf together. They are 6 and we surf already. So that's a fun fact.
Thank you, Andre. Plastics. Oh, you're muted, Plastics.
Thank you, Denisio. My full name is Andre Van Robin, but for the purpose of today, my name is Plastics, company that I founded 6 years ago as a blockchain-based measurement, reporting, and verification layer mandated by governments and companies to track and trace plastic waste recovery and recycling. So ultimately, what we do is a chain of custody verification all along the recovery and recycling process, working in 22 countries, working with governments, working with FMCGs, one of them Danone. And fun fact is, before I started the company 6 years ago, I used to practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, went up to purple belt. And since I started the company, I've just been doing Jiu-Jitsu in the company. Thank you.
Hey, Ward.
Thanks for having us, Denisio. My name is Ward. I'm CTO at Tokenance. So what is Tokenance? We're a boutique tech company. What does that mean? We're actually helping small to large enterprises building up regulatory compliance, and by doing so, or through the means of innovative technology like blockchain, AI, really combining all of that new technology and knowledge into applications that are usable for these clients. We started with Digital Product Passport in May 2025-ish, and so far in almost a year time, we've got a couple of pilots running. So it's been an exciting year so far, and there's more to come, I'm sure, for that. A little small fun fact for me, I actually bought recently a book on blockchain for my 1-year-old. So he's going to be the next in line for the industry.
The future is bright. Hey, Sam.
Hey everyone, my name's Sam, one of the co-founders of Zengate Global, and we're building our flagship solution, Palmyra Pro. It's a traceability, compliance, and trade solution, and we've been active for several years, and we work primarily in agricultural commodities, traceability, and transparency. So we've been doing some work recently out of Nigeria and Zambia, and looking to expand recently into LATAM markets as well. So yeah, excited to talk to everyone today. Oh, sorry, one last thing. Fun fact on my end, just over 12 months ago, I fractured my back paragliding, and I haven't been since. So I'm healthy now, but I was lying horizontal for a little while.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh my, I'm sorry to hear that. Anyway, my name is Nathan Williams. I'm the founder and CEO of MindSpider. We got started back in 2017, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and Bitcoin crossed the $1,000 mark for the first time. And I actually wrote one of the first white papers on how to use blockchain for supply chain traceability, specifically for metals mined to smelter. We're currently tracking about 10% of the world's tin supply. We've got projects tracking other critical metals, as well as with downstream components such as electric vehicle batteries. And we're working with companies like Ford Otosan, with Renault Group, with ABB. And yeah, we're we've been in this a little while and can definitely talk to a lot of the challenges in the industry. And fun fact about me, early on in my blockchain / MindSpider career, I ended up filming a TV show with Akon, who the rapper, who but it never saw the light of day. It got filmed and then never shown. So
yeah, that's a shame. But thanks, Marika.
Yeah, hi guys. So I'm the founder, CEO of Open Food Chain, also in the traceability scene in agri-food. And we've been doing that for a few years as well. What we try to do is make the farm to fork claims third-party validated. So you don't have to believe anyone on their blue eyes, but you can really see the validated claim locked on a blockchain system on Cardano now. And I think a not so fun fact is that we, with our team, we did build our own layer 1 UTXO blockchain back in the days. And we realized that, you know, what we think is technologically such a great idea wasn't really much accepted by the food industry. So we pivoted onto Cardano, where we are at a much better place. And a personal, so we work in chocolates. We now work with Kraft Heinz on the tomato ketchup. And a fun fact is I don't really like chocolate at all, but we have to do with lots of bean to bar chocolates. And I'm keen to dive into the topic of today.
All right. Thank you, everyone, really, for being here, you know, giving us your valuable time to discuss this well-needed to discuss topic. During the introduction, I mentioned that, you know, briefly, but I do want to bring it back at the table and really get your perspectives about that. So the industry is well positioned. You know, we have legal clarity. We have a growing market cap. There's huge potential for growth there. We have the tech. The tech exists. It works. There's been pilots proving that it actually works. We have platforms like the WEF, you know, saying it's better, cheaper, faster. You know, it enhances trust, transparency, traceability, real-time tracking of goods. You know, with all of this, let's say all of these favorable conditions, you would expect to see more enterprise adoption. You would expect to see, when it comes to blockchain-based supply chain and traceability solutions, that being the talk of the day. Instead, I get the impression that what was discussed back in the day in 2018 and 2019, when it was a thing, today, it's not really being discussed that much. So why is that?
I can be brave and go first if you want. I'll tell you something. This stuff is complicated. And I think that we can't discount just how complicated it is from the slowness of adoption. When this was first a topic in 2017, 2018, when it was because blockchain was a new technology in people's minds, right? Like people were like, hey, we can do anything. We can print our own money. What else can we do with it? And then people came on and said, well, supply chains, they look sort of like transactions that we can use blockchain for that. We can trace things that have never been traced before. I was on committees with international committees at the UN, at the Responsible Business Alliance, which back then was called something different, talking about blockchain guidelines and interoperability. I was the only technical guy on those calls. Mm-hmm. And what we have to remember is that the policy side of things, which drives a lot of this, is career level complex. And then same thing with the technology side of it. It's a career level complex, and trying to put these two worlds together makes an opportunity, but it's really hard for a lot of people to wrap their mind around. And I think that has really played into the need to develop out these technologies. I mean, early on, we also made our own layer one, and people had to use wallets. And you can imagine, supply workers in a warehouse having to download a wallet and, make sure there's tokens on it and getting error messages if there's not enough crypto. And, these things play into an enterprise's willingness to adopt.
Yeah, they do. They do, but I also think that it's really a classical hype cycle graph, right? We're really following the book. And I think if you look at AI is about 40, 50 years ahead of blockchain in many ways, right? And it's just now really becoming mainstream. So I also think, particularly when you talk traceability and interoperability and many players and many systems, I think we also have to downsize our expectations and really have a long-term game, right? Traceability is a long-term game.
Oh yeah.
I think that traditionally the Web3 industry was looking at its own navel, basically looking at itself, looking at the beauty of the technology, looking at how great blockchain is, and not really asking the business question is, what is it useful for? Yeah. And ultimately, over the last years, what has gotten blockchain introducing itself within supply chains and enterprise is that it has to serve a purpose. It has to be useful. So accountability, trust, transparency. But why? I mean, why go into that extra cost of transaction fees when a centralized database is more cost efficient? Well, how much worth is it to know exactly what's going on? And the problem is that since there's in our industry, in waste management, since there's so many fragmentation across municipalities, recyclers, operators, that data fragmentation means that there's really a low level of trust in self-reported recovery and recycling. And so ultimately you combine that with regulatory pressure and you go, wait a minute, if I use blockchain, I can build a very strong traceability record that will be obviously not changeable, not manipulative, not immutable. And that is what governments want to build their entire regulation, which is also, by the way, coming into play. So in our industry, from waste management, this is ultimately the last 6 years how we've seen it come to realization that why are we using it? Is it useful for something? As opposed to saying the tech is great, we do this, we do that, which has been traditionally the case in blockchain since the time that even Nathan said, 2017. Each year comes out, we come up with these new technologies, new ways of creating and of using the blockchain. But ultimately, companies need to really need the service. They need to pay for it. And so paying for something, it has to be worth something to them. And I think that this is where we are now, and where I do agree with Dionisio that the potential is huge, because only now is it when people are getting more mature in terms of, well, how does the technology serve the purpose of business?
Yeah, maybe on my point of view, just to touch on what everyone else has been saying, I think Nathan touched on it really well. These are just complex problems, right? And I might be maybe one of the younger ones on the call, and you look around crypto and you see billion-dollar companies basically getting printed out of nowhere, and you ask, what the heck? Like, how did they get millions of TVL or billions in TVL and millions of users overnight? And the sort of big realization over the years of trying constantly, feeling like you're smacking your head against a brick wall, is that like these are complex systems. Like, this isn't a B2C app that you can launch overnight, win a distribution game, and then become $1 billion company. Like, some of these customers that you work with, they've been around for 100 years or 200 years or 300 years, depending on where you are. So, it takes a lot of trust to build with these people first, for you to even experiment in these systems that they've built up and preserved over all these years. So I think it's really important to point that bit out. And then a few other things that come to mind, like traceability had a lot of traction 6-7 years ago, or maybe even longer. Like the 2017, 2018 bubble, we saw lots of projects and enterprises actually jump in. And the reality is a lot of them failed, right? And it's really cool to see, companies like MindSpider having sort of gone through that period and sort of winning now. But many of these traceability companies that receive millions and millions of dollars in funding, they're no longer around. So I think the industry has gone through this cycle of traceability fatigue, where everyone just says, blockchain can solve traceability, but that's a load of nonsense. I think blockchain is one of the many technologies that has to be part of a traceability solution. So like on our end, we're seeing a lot more traction. I think companies have sort of gone over that lull of being upset about projects not working, and a lot of them have been quite experimental, and they do see the potential now. And I think to Andre from Plastic's point, they're willing to pay. So it's been quite interesting to see that turn around. And I'm excited that it's now becoming a much more clear narrative once again on the blockchain side as well, which is quite nice.
Sure.
And-
Yeah. So one thing that I'd like to mention as well is, I think I speak
Go ahead.
over Ward.
All right, thank you. There's a couple of keywords that I heard, like the complexity and the traceability and everything. What I wanted to add to the chain of words that we've been using so far is just how scary this all sounds. Because from a company perspective, the words immutability and permanent being on the blockchain is not just about complexity, but it's also just scary. What if I make mistakes? What if something goes wrong? I need to roll these things back. It's going to be on there forever. Am I going to be perceived as a liar? Or how do we handle this? And it's that pivot from taking the part where this becomes scary into a solution that actually works and facilitates real value to not only the brands, but the people that are interacting with those brands. That's going to be a pivotal moment where we actually see adoption grow and rise.
Yeah, and maybe one thing I'm actually really keen to hear your thoughts on this. But one thing that we suffered a lot from, so agri-food is the least digitized industry of all industries, right? So they're really companies in general are sort of implementing their first ERP systems as we speak. And one thing that we had a lot of discussions on and wasted lots of time about is to explain the difference between crypto and blockchain. So we really had to mitigate a lot of misunderstanding about Ponzi schemes and crypto games and, not to talk about NFTs. So I'm keen. I do think that really slowed down the adoption.
Yeah. So let me take a peek here on this part that you mentioned about NFTs, right? So I believe, and I always say to other people that we meet, so all the traditional business companies that we meet during our journey, that we are moving from speculation to solution, right? So we used to have a very concentrated marketing to speculation, and now we are actually providing real solutions. And when it comes to solutions, it goes directly to a point that many of you guys mentioned, which is problem solving, right? So what we are really solving with the solution that we are bringing, right? So we are using blockchain to solve a why, a purpose, because we can tokenize everything, but should everything be tokenized? That's not the answer, right? So we should identify the real reason that we are using blockchain. And the main thing that I've been focusing is that are we really solving a problem, or I'm just being passionate about the technology that I believe and trying to implement something that I'm passionate about. So it's about solution, right? So it gives the solution, the right solution with the cost feasibility, with like the scalability that we need. And then of course we need to answer all those questions that Sam brought, right? So and also Ward brought about the complexity of what we are saying. So when you say immutability, and it's complex for traditional business to understand that now we have a database that you cannot change it anymore. So it's all about trust. So everything that you guys said, I agree, like pretty much. And just to close that, the last comment that you made about NFTs, right? So I always use I'm Brazilian, so I'm passionate about soccer. So you remember that in 2021, Neymar, one of our biggest players currently, not anymore like so big, but our most known player currently bought an NFT from the ape board company, right? So there was like the monkey, JPEG, but there was an NFT, which was a technology with this ERC 721, right? So that's the technology that we are actually aiming we started using it. So it was an NFT that was speculative and that has like ups and downs, pumps and dumps. But the technology that was used for that as a toy was actually the technology that we are using to build a DPP right now. So it's very interesting to see how these things flow on the environment.
This is a very interesting thing that you bring up, Andre, is that I think one of the big challenges for enterprises to adopt traceability and digital product passports and the DPP in general is that there's a very wide definition of what exactly a DPP is. I've spoken with a lot of companies. I've never met anyone who's on this call, but I've known a lot of people who are in the DPP and traceability space, and they all seem to have a different core technological approach to what is a DPP and what is traceability. Like some of them set up data collection workflows, and you can press a button and then it'll generate a PDF, and they say this is the DPP, this is the digital product passport. Other companies will say, well, no, it's a unique digital record like an NFT, but an NFT that represents a product, so like a digital twin. Other companies will say, well, it's a digital record like a bucket you dump data in, and then people can update it regularly. So because you've got all of these different approaches, and those are sort of high level ones. There are a lot of detail differences as well. It makes it hard, I think, for customers to know exactly what they're getting, because most customers will come in and go, well, I want something blockchain, something traceability, something, and they want you to fill in the gaps. And it's hard to compare yourself to other companies that are trying to solve a similar problem, but do it in very different ways.
And maybe just to sort of add on to what Nathan was saying, one of the big challenges I've run into, and the way I would probably describe it best, is that the regulation is like so at odds at what the realities is on the ground. And I can just give you like just one example that's got nothing to do with the blockchain bit, which is around the EU deforestation regulation. And part of that requires you to do mapping of these farmer plots around land use, so you can prove that it's come from a certain place. And it's not once I could find anywhere that talks about the accuracy that's required when you're doing the plotting. It doesn't ask you how you do it. It doesn't ask you how accurate it needs to be. And we went and tested some stuff out in Nigeria in December, and we were finding that the GNSS chips that are inside of normal smartphones, which is the super cheap Android phones that these farmers have access to, just does not work in canopy areas. So now we've had to send, special devices out so that they can be compliant in the first place. So like and then so if you just even go further in that, like in terms of what happens inside the warehouses, as things get processed, things get batched, things get mixed, things get quality assured, right? There's just so much stuff in there that the regulation does not think about at all. And technologists can't solve just alone. It just becomes this operational thing that you have to just get your head around. And to really just finalize on the stuff that everyone's been saying about how complex it is that if you're new to this, you can't just solve it just because you're smart. Like you have to be able to see how it's connected to other supply chains. How is it similar to the tenant that sits downstream of you? Like all of these things. And it does take time to be able to abstract all of it, to be able to connect the dots. And at least for us, like that's the thing that's taken us the longest. And it's only now starting to sort of make sense. But the regulations do not reflect what happens on the ground, and just makes it a whole lot more complicated when you get there. And technology is just not the only way to do it.
I was just wondering, because sorry, Marika, go ahead.
No, go for it. Go ahead.
I was wondering because Nathan, you brought that up. I mean, there's a couple of notes that I'm taking here, and but before I get to the other notes, Nathan, you mentioned something, and I got the impression that Sam, you were more or less alluding to that as well. The lack of standards. Could that be one of the problems why you're seeing everyone's developing their own solutions, right? And why it's not, let's say, being interoperable? But before we get into that, let's
maybe on the lack of standards, right? Mm-hmm. So I've been working on agri-food data standards for about 25 years. And if there's something, there's not a lack. So we have a lot of standards. It's a lack of using them, and it's a lack of a coordination on the right use. I mean, look at GS1, right? GS1 stands for Global Standard Number One. If you go, if we compare a supply chain like cacao, like cocoa, with a supply chain like juices, the use of standardization is much higher in juice than it is in cacao, because it's a lot of smallholders, a lot of small players, a lot of traders, and little enforcement. So I think we don't need more standards. We need to use them.
I think companies need to dig deep into the mechanics of each particular industry and respond to the needs. Again, from our point of view, in waste management, the ask is, I want to save taxes. The ask is, I want to have low audit costs. The ask is, I want to build financial instruments that I can sell. Those are the asks. And coming up with the answer saying, well, blockchain can help you A, B, and C, then all of a sudden then you have a conversation going with the corporates or with the governments because you're actually solving that problem. And ultimately, I think for DPP to work, well, from my very humble understanding, you can't build one solution that fits all. You've got to really specialize in an industry, which I understand here that Sam and Marieke are specialized in agro industry. Well, that specialty generates more knowledge, more expertise, more perfection, more knowledge, more technology, and that is the right way to go about really trying to fit in blockchain technology within a supply chain. Focus really, because it's really only when you focus on the industry that you actually have that open and honest dialogue with executives from the industry where you can actually solve the problem.
Who should be having those conversations? But who should be having those conversations with the executives, with the industry? Are you saying that the governments are the ones basically, or this is the policymakers should be the one in conversation with the executives, with the industry?
This may surprise you, but capitalism is, you're an entrepreneur, you have an idea, you've got to go and do the sale, you've got to go and do the hard work. That's, everybody has to do that. Lead generation, conversion, engage customer, and get money for your product. That's the only way. And ultimately, this is what companies need to do, blockchain companies need to do, and pick an industry in which they want to work in and go ahead and do that. And it's not easy. It's very hard work. It's very hard work. And only after 6 years are we really starting to generate revenue. We see profitability in the horizon. And it's really a trial and error. But there is no other way, because that's the only way that the executive, who, by the way, I believe it was Nathan or somebody said about the job, the decision, their jobs is at stake, right? So they've got to make a decision that will not put their job in danger. And at the same time, they have to meet an obligation in their company to find a solution for that problem. So that honest dialogue can only be done if you're trying to sell them something, really, sincerely. And then the questions, feedback loop, and then fine-tuning the product for that particular need. And if that tendency reoccurs across your industry, i.e. you have more customers in the agro, more customers in the waste management, then you know that you're onto something. You know that you're doing something right. But there is no shortcut to depth of relevancy.
So I can agree with my namesake here, Andre, a little bit. And I can share a bit of my experience here on what happened in Brazil, right? So I don't know how you guys feel about Brazil, but sometimes you can have like bias comments, or not bias, but fact comments about what happened here. So we started with exactly this mindset, right, Andre? We went to OEMs, so we talked to Renault, we talked to Volvo, we talked to Hyundai, we talked to the Brazilian OEMs here that has like big access to government. And we find out that our speech with the OEMs was weak because they were asking for regulation. And I don't know, and I'm completely with you on my idealism, right? So I agree with you on what you said, but when it comes to the business that we are building, and we start doing that with that mindset, we found out that the way we were doing was the wrong way. like for us, right, for our ecosystem. So what we had to do? We need to go back and start to find our way to arrive at the regulatory authority in order to identify and to show people, to give trust for the people that will be using our product, that vehicle is the right vehicle that are tokenized. And that's why we came through this movement from moving directly from the OEMs directly, and then moving to the government in order to create an environment for regulation. So we are currently working with the Trans Department here, and then we are connecting with them. We are integrated with them. So they send us the information, we tokenize the information, we create the vehicle passport, and then we gave them back the token number and the transaction hash at their database. So we are like the first company in Brazil that are actually working with the government directly, and then showing to them that it is possible to have this connection between a physical asset and a digital asset, and this correlation is real, and now the full ecosystem, OEMs, banks can use this, and then we can create a business model based on this thing, right? So it is hard, but that's how our experience here evolved during this year.
I want to go a topic back and challenge Andre Plastics' mention of focusing on the industry, because in the end, if we solidly focus on a specific industry and we only get touch points within that industry, we're just going to create another set of silos. What if at a certain point we have to go cross industry? We'll reach that same point where we now say blockchains are not sufficiently interoperable. So focusing on an industry for expertise, I'm totally for that, but we need to keep a step back or an open mind to also look across industries to make sure that we're not sticking just to that industry and applying standards just to that industry, but also go more broad.
If I may, I think that there's sort of an ugly truth underneath a lot of this that doesn't get talked about enough, which is that if you're in a traceability business to try and let people know the information, do the companies really want to know? When I got started, right, one of the big hot topics was that was the conflict mineral regulation in Europe, and leading off of the U.S. one and the Dodd-Frank Act, and there was a number of companies that had tried to map out their supply chains and show, we're trying our best to see what's coming from the DRC, and making sure we're not funding this civil war in the DRC. And I think it was Google and Microsoft both came out with these reports saying, okay, here's what we found, and then they got sued by a adamant young nonprofit that wanted to make a name for themselves, I guess. And so then nobody else wanted to find out. And the thing is, what I found in these companies is, in the biggest companies, you're going to have departments that they're really dedicated to trying to map out supply chains, get traceability, build transparency, and they want this to succeed. But then they've got to sell that to their boss and their boss's boss, their boss's boss's boss. They've got to sell it up the chain and show an ROI for what they're doing. And a lot of times they have no budget. Like, I went to some of these, multi-billion-dollar companies that couldn't get a 10K budget. And we did a project, but we had to keep it within a very, very limited scope. And getting the follow-on budget was even harder. And part of this comes down to the fact that I think the companies may not want to know. And this plays into how we go forward as a traceability industry, right? Like, where is the value? Is it in compliance and in sustainability? Is there a business case to be made there? Or do we need to ride on the back of a different business case to say, okay, well, you're going to get your efficiency from here, or you're going to get your more sales from here, and at the same time, we're going to have your carbon emissions and your due diligence reports and the no child labor checks and things like that.
What I'm seeing in the food industry is that there is a definite stream that everybody realizes that you have to have traceability, because you have to be able to manage risks, right? Otherwise, there's significant costs that will occur anyways. The thing is that it doesn't involve various departments and across island collaboration. But I think there's a very strong tendency to really pull that forward. And it's helped by regulation for sure. And I think the best driver is really in the consumer angle, right? So if there's a commercial value to having traceability and unlocking that traceability, then things start rolling.
Maybe just something I want to add, like to what Marike was saying, like the whole consumer angle bit, I think works really well for niche and specialty products. And I guess if you think about the technology adoption curve, the people starting at the very beginning, like you do get that momentum, that velocity. And I know, you know, Open Food Chain been working with different brands and they really care about that. But as soon as you start moving into the commodity layer, it gets more and more complicated. And I think the ugly truth to what Nathan was saying, just to spell it out even further, when companies don't want to know, they don't want to know. There's a reason why there's layers and layers of intermediaries where they can legally be protected by saying, hey, like we didn't know that this stuff was happening down, you know, upstream. We didn't know that there were 12-year-olds picking, you know, X commodity and harvesting. We didn't know that the women were being underpaid and mistreated. Like we bought from these traders, like it's their responsibility. And I think what you find is traceability is just perfect when it's all vertically integrated. You know, when one company has its subsidiaries and it manages its farms or its mines and keep a really tight lid around quality, around the standards that they use. And, you know, many of these traceability projects that did get piloted all these years ago and still today can go and show that and say, look, this really works. But once you start moving into, you know, many different markets where it is highly fragmented, especially where people don't want to know what's actually happening, like on the ground, I think is when you run into these issues. And I think regulation has been good in the sense that it forces companies to face the fact that there's some pretty bad stuff happening on the ground. And we were in Nigeria and we heard chainsaws. We heard chainsaws in the distance of trees getting chopped down. And the reality is that the people down there have no clue, not all of them, because many of the people we spoke to are very informed, but many people are still not informed about these regulations, that they might lose access to certain markets. They're clearing trees because they're not getting paid enough and they need to afford money to pay for their kids' education. They need to be able to afford money so that they can continue to pay for their SIM plans so that they can call their family, that they can go to work. And they're cutting trees down so that they can earn, you know, a few extra bucks a month. But they have no clue in some cases when they're disconnected that commodity that gets harvested, you know, especially for the EUDR stuff, will never make it to the EU. No one told them that. And so on the regulation side, whilst it's good, it's putting pressure on brands and companies to basically invest in these technologies to become more transparent. The reality is that upstream, no one, you know, not no one, that's a lie. Many people, though, are still left underserved and left out because not enough people have gone in to have these conversations with them to tell them what's going on. And that's the ugly truth. And we're talking about millions and millions of people that are affected by this. And at the end of the day, they're trying to make a living and they're trying to survive.
But Sam, that goes for the entire industry. I mean, on all layers, right? Everyone wants to survive. So the question really is, who should be responsible for creating that awareness? Is it the one who actually created or came up with the policy? Should they be responsible for making sure that everyone that falls under that specific law abides by it? How do they do that? Should they? And then the second is, who's going to enforce it? Because I think, Marika, that's a question that was a point that you also touched on. Who is going to enforce this?
So I mean, that's what you clearly see with the EUDR, right? So there's a big discussion within the industry that everybody's sort of doubting whether and how it's going to be enforced. And if you look at the Dutch agency that is supposed to enforce the EUDR, or that will enforce the EUDR, they're not technology first, right? If something like the EUDR comes in place, the response to that is that they hire 24 more people. So I think what I ended up is to really focus on where things really make sense and where there's a good energy that makes things going. And in terms of, Sam, what you said, there's a lot of, shitty stuff happening in supply chains that nobody really wants to know about. But I think if we build transparency and traceability as we go, things will improve on a marginal level, but they will improve. And I think in the end, we need governments and we need enforcement. And I think it's good that the European Union is waking up a little bit. So I think at least that's our take, right? We focus on where we see interest and where we have good traction and where we have the attitude to make things work.
What I'd like to do, guys, is move from where we are right now to really kind of getting more clarity from you all. What is necessary? What do we need to do as an industry to move beyond the current status to actually see a bit more wider adoption? What is...
Can I just bring in one topic that I think is particularly in blockchain and I don't know if it's underrated, but it's a good UX, it's a good interface, it's simplicity for users. I think that's a number one.
Honestly, I would agree. A lot of the block to using this is just how overwhelming a lot of the traceability topic is, and the information and also the lack of clarity that other people have talked about. I mean, government people aren't technologists or traceability experts, so they write laws that are framework, hoping the industry will come along and fill in the gaps, and then they can sort of clarify the law when they see what's winning and what's working. But then everyone gets nervous because there's these big gaps in the law, and so everyone waits on everybody else to clarify things. And having it be simple, having someone say, well, let's try this and we'll fix it later if it's wrong, like just do first, ask questions later, and more data is better than less data. I think that
totally agree.
Keeping it simple.
Yeah, I completely agree with that aspect as well. We have to move from the regulatory aspect of DPP and enforcement of transparency into the expectation of people actually working or consuming the products. If we make it towards a situation where there's first mover advantage for a company and they just go with it and say, okay, we're going to adopt it now, it becomes a brand asset, and they're going to have an edge over everyone else that doesn't, and everyone else is going to follow as soon as they would see their technology fit, and it's going to follow that way.
I think that, Dionisio, to answer your, I guess, macro policy question, again, in our field, in terms of waste management or extended producer responsibility, environmental law, you have 63 countries in the world that have it, and then you have, out of 198 countries, all the rest don't. And most of the countries that have EPR legislation are in Europe. No blockchain. No blockchain. Everything has been going on for the last 20 years. No blockchain. In the countries where they're about to deploy EPR, extended producer responsibility regulation, or that have recently deployed EPR, they basically are willing to leapfrog, use blockchain as the core building block for this, so that future generations will have records that are basically unchangeable and purely public, on which they can build upon to do what? Well, to build more recycling, more recovery, to increase recycling rates, recovery rates, etc. So as a policymaker perspective, I think it's important in Brussels or in the United States, where there is no federal EPR mandate, it's all on a state level, to really explain the virtues of blockchain. Right, from at least our point of view in waste management, blockchain is really a very, very good solution, and convince the lawmakers that when they write their laws, if you want to comply with traceability, if you want to comply with environmental law, you must have data on chain. And there, that work is definitely needs to be done at big country levels. India is the largest country that just recently adopted EPR. And what's the result? Hundreds of millions of dollars in plastic credit market is growing phenomenally because they force. Brazil, Andre from Brazil is there also. We are working in Brazil as well. And there is an increasing market to buy and sell invoices that prove that waste was collected and recycled. And that's when you have ultimately government support to say, yeah, blockchain does have its virtues. It's necessary. Let's write it into the law. So as a policymaker, as a macroeconomic influencer, that work can be done. But this is not something for an entrepreneur, because an entrepreneur needs to generate revenues, needs to build this business, needs to pay the salaries, needs to grow. So obviously it's working hand in hand with policymakers and with influencers to do that. But from our point of view, this is what we think.
Andre,
just
go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Sam, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think my counter is, I think to do it at a relatively large scale, I think all of the conditions that exist today are sufficient. I don't actually think anything needs to change. There's enough regulated markets that need these solutions. There are enough customers and brands, governments that care about implementing these technologies. And I think the pie is big enough to actually go out and build these technologies to be sustainable. Like, that's my honest view on this right now. And I think, especially with all the AI stuff that's come out, the ability to launch quickly and build quickly, I think has accelerated. Traceability solutions used to be very expensive. Like even standard ERP solutions, if you just use that as a benchmark, like much more expensive. So I think there's enough stuff happening right now which allows these traceability companies, like everyone on the call here, to build a sustainable business. But I think the real force multiplier becomes when you start unlocking all of the flywheels around traceability. So traceability, we think of, at least where we work, as sort of as an infrastructure layer. And the applications that you get on top of it is really where the growth comes. And I think to be able to unlock that, you need capital, which basically means the right funds are being moved into the companies that are ready for that. Traditionally, you might have had governments or development institutions funding these initiatives, but budgets are getting cut, funding's getting cut, so you don't really quite get that support. But when I talk about the force multipliers that exist on top of it, it's everything else that you can do once the traceability systems exist. It might be, at least now, all of a sudden, novel data sets are going to be important for AI. Like, think about all of the upstream data that gets captured, whether in the plastic credits markets or if you're in agriculture or metals and minerals, that used to be written down on paper or Excel sheets that didn't speak to each other. There are people out there that want to pay for it, whether you're a futures trader that wants to have better insights into what's happening upstream, whether you're a bank or an insurer that wants to price risk a bit more efficiently. I think that's where you start seeing traceability businesses move away from just being an infrastructure provider, but really providing significantly more. And I think the limitation that you'll find is capital. And everyone likes to invest in AI companies and hype projects. And I hope that at some point they realize that once the infrastructure is built and it's ready to scale, that's where the capital gets directed.
Thanks, Sam. Guys, oh yeah, by the way, everyone joining us through the live stream, thank you for joining us. It's always great, to see so many of you tuning in to consume this well-needed topic. And of course, thanks to all of the panelists, all of the experts joining us here today. We did receive, let's say, 2 questions actually from one of the viewers. Sam, whoever wants to take this, what if enforcement is by consumers, not governments? Consumers would stop buying products and boycott when scandals happen or surface? What are your take on this, guys?
Well, go ahead, Nathan.
What if my grandma had wheels? Then she would have been a bike. I think that This is playing a little bit of hope. Consumers can get angry, but at the end of the day, the reason that companies have trouble caring about supply chain issues is because consumers have trouble caring about supply chain issues. And the reason consumers have trouble caring about supply chain issues is because they want cheaper products. And it's not because they're greedy, it's because problems are far away, separated by multiple layers of supply chain. You don't see it, and you've got problems right in front of you. And we've achieved a level of outrage overload, information overload. It's hard to care about people across the world when you have problems that you have to care about right at your doorstep. When you've got war in Ukraine, when you've got hungry kids, when you've got your political opponents gaining power, and there's a lot of things for us to worry about. So, and it gets hard to deal with that sort of overload, especially if you don't have clear-cut choices. And that's the biggest issue. It's like, what are you going to choose between car 1, 2, and 3, and they all are getting parts from similar suppliers, and one is like 1% more responsible than the other because they're very complex things that are made of very complex mix of components. It's not like you got the fair free car and then the not fair free car. And then there's a price difference. And so these things make it really challenging to rely on consumers alone. It may be possible to have companies rely on that.
I think for food, it's a different story, right? Because we see a definite change in behavior between continents, first of all, but a big change is coming within new generations. And that is where there is definitely on the food side of life, right? There's a definite hunger for data and validated data. So the young consumers have a different and a better buying behavior than previous ones. So there's a spark of hope for sure.
From our experience, everybody wants to save the world, but nobody wants to pay for it. And this is a reality. When I started the company 3 years down the road as a B2C model, we almost went under. We had to pivot to B2B because ultimately the end customer was the one who was buying sustainability, buying plastic credits to finance impact projects, and sales were very small, very low, and exposure was very high. One of our biggest customers still to date is Barcelona Football Club. It doesn't get bigger than that in terms of brand at a global level. And even with that superpower, the capability of converting consumers into spending some money to help recover plastic from the oceans, I'm sorry to say, was pitiful in terms of impact. And then companies who are the ones responsible for putting their products into the market, they have regulatory obligations. They want to make sure that there are no scandals. They have the budgets to be able to substantiate those. And that's where we decide to focus as a business. And 3 years into that B2B route, finally, I can say we are a business, we're growing, and we have good possibilities. But ultimately, the experience is that money counts. And when you're a consumer, you're pinched by education, vacation, mortgage, rent, food, etc. And you're on the store shelf and you have to make a decision between spending €2 or €1 for butter. You're going to go for €1 for butter. And you're not going to be too much paying attention to if the butter was done organically or not. This was the reality that we found out. So ultimately, from our point of view, regulation is the key driving engine behind the adoption of environmental impact, for sure, and definitely for the adoption of traceability.
Does that count for other industries as well? Do you think that counts for us?
For a majority of the industries, maybe not all of them. One thing that I wanted to add to the regulatory / consumer aspect is it's more of a push and pull effect, where we need both to actually happen at some point, where there's regulatory push from above, but also consumer pull that actually the consumers need to want this. And it's going to go organically grow as we move over time and there's more adoption. And to be honest, the consumer adoption is our only viable, not the only, but one of the key viable KPIs that we actually see that this is changing something, and it has to happen over time.
Ward,
My,
go
I
ahead,
think
Sam.
my so try to balance the view out. Like, I think there are a lot of consumers out there that care enough about this stuff that are willing to pay. I think it's fair to say that there's a cohort, and it's really great when you find those brands. And I know Marike works with a bunch of them, right? And you can have like real impact there. You can go and deploy this technology with co-ops, especially the stuff Marike works on. Bean to bar, chocolate companies, right? And there are people that are willing to pay, but I think to Nathan's point, there are also many people that just don't care. And if you want to have wide-scaled impact, you have to I think face that realization straight in its face. So there's going to be a lot of consumers that don't care, which then forces you to think like the way Andre from Plastics is talking about, which is okay, if let's say 70% of customers don't care enough, they do care but not enough, then who's going to pay for this stuff, and who's going to have that impact? Because ultimately what you don't want is, let's say 30% of consumers care. If we ever get to that number, what are you going to do? Just have traceability for 30% of the supply chain and then everyone else is left out? Like that doesn't seem all that fair. And it's just impractical. So you do need to find these other drivers, I think, that exist. And there are enough businesses out there that care about this stuff. And I think, as Marike was saying before, like there is a convergence that ultimately, as much of this stuff does ultimately end up being traced. And the stuff that doesn't get traced is where the companies don't want it traced. And I think that will always be the case.
Yeah, I agree with you there. There is one more question, basically from a viewer, Wavescope. And Wavescope asked here, is there a platform where companies can bid or discover traceability solutions? I think that's a really good question if you ask me, because, hey, at some point, by regulation, they will be obliged or required to actually comply. And they may not know where to look. It would be good to have a kind of a marketplace or something somewhere for them to discover. What do you guys think? Does this exist already?
There are a couple for just a couple of industries, right? Like, but there's not a uniform one. Like, for example, in automotive industry, you've got Catena X, which is the data sharing infrastructure that they've built for automotive, and there are apps that go on their app store. And similarly, all the big informatics companies like Google, Microsoft, AWS, they all have their app stores that will have different things listed, SAP. But there isn't sort of like a universal one for traceability, at least not yet. And I think part of the reason is that it's not a mass market situation yet for traceability. It's something that what I would classify as in the early adopter phase, that although people who want to go first are there. It's moving over, and as regulation inches closer, it's going to move more towards mass market, where you just buy it off the shelf. It's not customized. You pay your price, you get your traceability, and you're done. But we got to get a little bit closer to some enforcement deadlines.
Understood. Just a quick question there before, because we're ending towards, let's say, the end of this episode. There is still one elephant in the room, really, and that is privacy, right? Okay, I think one of the things we seem to agree is that in order to really achieve that level of adoption, we need that regulatory push at one side. I think, Nathan, you said we need more simplicity. There's too much complexity technically, right? So we need to simplify the solutions that we have. And then I noticed, Ward, you mentioned that we also need a good collaboration between the industry and the policymakers. So there's multiple factors here, really, that we seem to align on and believe that all of that would lead towards more or less that level of adoption that we expect or we look forward to. But word on the street is the enterprises more or less hold back on adopting blockchain technology because they don't want their business on the street. Yes, I know for plastics, for you it may work. You don't want to open permissionless blockchain. But for other companies like maybe Vetri, maybe even MindSpider, and the others here at the panel, it may not work because within that same chain, you may not want to expose who somewhere down the line a supplier is. So how are we dealing with that? Do you think that that's a blocker?
It all comes down to the perspective of what do we perceive as transparency or privacy, because a DPP solution could evenly be a data disclosed format, what is just connected to the blockchain to provide proof, not necessarily the information being on blockchain and being publicly available, but just that proof being there, that if there's any questions about from regulatory perspective or auditors, that the proof can still be connected towards the data being supplied. And that doesn't make it generally public.
I agree entirely with what Ward said. From our business perspective, we work with documentational verification, the invoices, the proof of payments, very sensitive information that the invoice was paid, waybill, bill of ladings, documentation of transportation linked to those invoices. That's very sensitive information that you wouldn't want the world to know who you're working with, how much you're paying, or how much you're making on each sale of waste. We solved it by extracting data points and connecting them with private key to the underlying centralized database. So ultimately, the concept that I interpret Ward has just said is that the data is public, you know it's there, and you know there's a path to access the underlying information should be required by regulatory authorities, tax authorities, police authorities, etc. And from our waste management industry perspective, that's how we were able to bridge that gap.
Just wanted to add one small addition, and then Nathan, you can go ahead. This doesn't mean that there is one or the other. This could be a hybrid system where some of the information is publicly disclosed and the other information is private. It's not just all private, all public.
I was just going to tell a little story that early on in our career, we had one of our big clients say, "Hey, we've got antitrust issues. We don't want to know who's answering these questions because we need this information, but we can't risk an antitrust suit." So we built this entirely crazy system that was undata mineable, that ended up sending to a private wallet that had an index hash, and then the other person logged in order to get it was crazy. It worked amazingly. No one ever used it. And the reason no one ever used it is that we engineered a beautiful solution to something that they could actually solve without technology. And they solved it by just having a legal and compliance team that doesn't talk to the purchasing team, and the legal compliance team deal with this information, and they just have a wall between them. And so we got to be a little bit careful when we're designing our solutions as well, that we don't engineer for problems, over-engineer them for certain problems.
Yeah, I love that.
I was about the same thing. It's all about architecture, I would say, because we can have hybrid solutions for privacy, right? So it doesn't need to be everything on chain. It doesn't need to be like everything open. We can have a hybrid solution between them with a layer of security in the middle. We can create a data room in the middle that some people would use their wallets to access the data if needed. So I think there are solutions for that right now. We just need to be clear to the industry that we have those solutions. That is not an issue, right? So we can work on that because we are not purely Web3, but we can have like hybrid solutions between that connects Web2 with Web3 that supports us. We face that discussion here because we're talking about vehicles, and vehicles, when you combine vehicles with owner, that's where the issue is for data privacy, right? So, because if you know the owner and you have that open, that's a LGPD situation for Brazil, right? So that's our law here, doesn't allow that to happen. And that's a very valuable information for the OEMs, for example. They want to know which person or who has their car currently, and they doesn't know that. So they would pay a lot of money to have that information, right? But we cannot disclose that information. So we deal with that a lot, and then what we are building are architecture building, right? So we did a layer of security in the middle that actually provides that level of privacy.
All right. Thank you. Guys, we are at the end of this episode. And but I do want to allow everyone to give a final thought, on the topic really about that gap between adoption and what we basically see here today within the industry. I'd say let's start with Andre, Sam, and down the line. Andre.
I just lose you for a moment, Denisio. Can you just repeat what I said? I'm sorry.
Yes. Okay. So the question is, if you can share any final thoughts on something that you feel like you'd like people to know in terms of the adoption of blockchain based supply solutions.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing on my experience during this year is pretty much about education, right? So we should raise awareness around what we are doing, because it's not a big deal. It's not a big monster, right? So we should be able to talk with them about the solutions that it delivers, and we should have the all knowledge. We cannot just talk superficially about things. We should go deep in the technology that we are saying when they have like deeper questions. Like for example, why I'm doing this using blockchain instead of using the normal, right? So you should be able to say that right away with confidence, because they will show them that you actually know what you're doing and you believe in what you're doing, and you start to raise an awareness across the industry on what you're doing. The other thing that I would say, we should be able to actually work for pilots. I think someone said that here, right? So we should do first and correct later. We should do things to show the usability of what we're doing, because we know that there is usability. So we should go for as many as pilots we can in order to show people the real usability, and have a showcase to actually show in reality, right, what happened, and how the solution solved real problems. I think that's it.
I think on my side, I'm just going to paraphrase like a few things that I heard Marika say and Andre from Plastic say, which is like just show up with a solution that works, that's reliable, that they need. And they don't really come and ask questions what the technology is it blockchain, is it not blockchain? They don't care. Like if you're offering something that works, like people will use it, that people trust, then your problems are solved there. And at least recently, like the last 6 to 9 months, no one's asking me why blockchain. You're telling me it's blockchain enabled, you use blockchain, and they go, oh, great, okay. Like that's it. I'm not seeing the same skepticism that existed years ago. People just want stuff that works.
Wonderful, nice one. And maybe just to add on that, I just think we're just started. So, and we're on a good ride. So I think it's going to be more, and it's going to be helping everybody in the supply chain from farm to fork, or from production to the end.
Thanks. Plastics.
I want to echo what Sam said, what Andre said, and Marieke, just by underlying 2 points. One, really know your business, know the industry that you're dealing with, and know the pain points, as in the traditional sales approach. Really know what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then come up with a solution that really is not necessarily talking about blockchain, but that is actually solving the problem. And then blockchain is just a checkpoint or checklist. Yeah, it's a check on the list, because it has A, B, and C. But ultimately, why you're really providing a solution, it has to be really dug deep. And from a general entrepreneurial perspective, I think focusing on an industry, digging deep, going into the problems, learning about that is a very good path forward. That's what I think.
I guess I can throw my 2 cents in here, which is that I think that that this whole conversation got started, as someone earlier said, solution looking for a problem. And we know that there's a problem, but the problem is a systemic problem. It's a wicked problem. It's a multifaceted problem where everyone is participating and feels the problem, but no one is responsible for. For example, no single snowflake is responsible for a blizzard. No single entity is responsible takes responsibility for supply chain traceability. But I'm actually very confident that this is going to grow very quickly and become universally adopted. Traceability is going to be very commonplace, predominantly because companies need more traceability just to interact with this new economy. The whole world is going in this direction, and it's going to be pushed forward by regulation, but that's not the reason. It's because it's going to be an automated economy, and more there's going to be a need of data just to make decisions about these products as they go along.
Thank you, Ward.
All right, I want to just close up with the perspective of not hiding behind the regulatory compliance, but really building on the long-term or the mid-term ROI that the solution can bring from the perspective of circular economy, understanding your products, understanding your data, getting that data, and making sure that you can actually work and trust the data that you're seeing on the internet.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ward. It's incredible, really. And I think, Ward, Nathan, I agree with you there as well. Actually, with everyone here in the panel. But, while we're having this conversation here today, this is just a moment in time. As the technology continues to grow, get better, improve, as we see more and more clarity from a regulatory perspective and also technologically wise, I think we have to continue the conversations. It's also essential that the industry seek ways and pathways to work together with the policymakers, because the policymakers may not always, let's say, understand the technical side of the story, but having a way to work together with them may find, let's say, better clarity for the industry. Now, someone said earlier, we need more simplicity. We're overcomplicating things. And that's correct. Where there's complexity, the people above in the chain may not really understand fully how it works, and maybe less inclined to sign off on, let's say, such ideas. But if we're able to simplify that, make it more easy to understand, maybe we may just increase the probability, of achieving that level of adoption that we all want to achieve. Let's not the conversation end here, but let's continue that. I'd love to see more of these conversations happen, not only within the supply chain industry and not only amongst these thought leaders here, but please, let's move the conversations further. Thank you for joining, everyone. Until next time.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denisio, for the organization and the moderation. Thanks for having me. It was great.
Thank you.